Welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Amita Harari, and coming up in today's newscast, continued unrest in Israel as victim of Kiryat Arba terror attack is laid to rest in Jerusalem. Israel heading back to elections for the 5th time in 4 years, and not everyone is satisfied. And later, Israeli autonomous driving company is making its trading debut on Wall Street. Thousands of mourners gathered in Jerusalem on Sunday to attend the funeral of 49-year-old Ronen Hanania, murdered yesterday near Hebron by Palestinian terrorists. Earlier, a Palestinian rammed his car into a checkpoint near Jericho, wounded 5 soldiers. More from ILTV's Steve Leibovich.
Ronen Hanania's son Daniel was one of 3 others wounded in yesterday's attack near Hebron. It was just a few days short of his father's 50th birthday. Daniel's hand and lower arm were in a cast from the bullet wound he sustained when the gunman shot at their parked car. This after visiting a Palestinian convenience store located in the gate of Kiryat Arba, the community where they live. Ronen was hit in the head and died almost immediately. Daniel, who was lightly wounded, called for help and ran back inside the store. While standing near his father's body at Jerusalem's Har Menuchot cemetery, Daniel said, "I love you very much. You were with me the whole way, all the time, even in the last moments of your life." Hours after the Hebron attack, but before the funeral, a Palestinian driver plowed his vehicle into Israeli soldiers at 2 locations south of Jericho. 5 soldiers were injured before the driver was shot and killed by the guards. Police said the Palestinian attacker first rammed into soldiers near Nebe Musa and then continued driving and slammed his car into a bus stop at the Almog Junction. 2 of the wounded were in moderate condition, and the rest were lightly injured.
First thing Tuesday morning, Israel is heading back to elections for the 5th time in about 45 months. But with 5 campaigns and nearly 4 years of political infighting to keep in mind, many are asking, how on earth did we get there? ILTV anchor Aaron Porras with a summary.
Given the chutes and ladders-esque sequence of events, it's easy for Israelis to forget just how they're ending up back at the ballot boxes for the 5th and possibly even the 6th time. Well, our story begins November 2018, 3 years into then Prime Minister Netanyahu's 4th term in office, when a botched Israeli operation in Gaza sparked 48 hours of fighting, ending finally with a ceasefire. Coalition partner Avigdor Lieberman, however, called the ceasefire a surrender to terror and resigned from the government, leaving Bibi with a slim 61-seat majority. Next, fast forward a couple months, and under pressure from the ultra-Orthodox parties over a bill to draft Haredim into the IDF, Netanyahu dissolved the Knesset and called for snap elections, which took place on April 9, 2019, 7 months earlier than scheduled. But now, under criminal investigation and pressure to pass the Haredi draft bills, Netanyahu, who had the principal mandate to form a coalition, could not muster the majority. And instead of giving the chance to rival Benny Gantz, the Knesset passed a bill to dissolve, plunging Israel into its first repeat vote, scheduled for September 2019. Now, after the second election, both Netanyahu and Gantz got their shot at forming a government. But after weeks of efforts, again, neither could succeed, and thus the third election was initiated. Jumping ahead to March 2nd, 2020 now, Israelis returning to the ballots for the 3rd time in a year. But under the shadow of coronavirus, as well as pressures to resist partnerships with Netanyahu, who by then was under indictment for bribery, fraud, and breach of trust, Gantz and Netanyahu agree to form the first so-called rotational unity government, the idea being to lead the country safely through the pandemic, as well as to pass a national budget to address the growing economic crises gripping the country. And Gantz going back on his promises to resist sitting with Netanyahu in order to do so. Within months, however, Netanyahu seemingly backtracking on his power-sharing agreement with Gantz and also refusing to pass the budget for 2 years as stipulated in the coalition agreement. So the deadline to pass the budget passing in December 2020, and the coalition collapsed. And with that, the 4th election was called. So now we're in March 2021. The 11-day war, Operation Guardian of the Walls, with Hamas in Gaza has ended, and once again, Netanyahu's Likud is the largest party. But once again, it fails to muster a majority. It's at this time, with the second mandate to form a coalition, that Yair Lapid of the Yesh Atid party, the second largest party in Knesset now, announces that he has managed to gather a razor-thin majority. But his rotational power-sharing government agreement, including an Islamist party for the first time in Israel's history, as well as both right-wing and left-wing parties. Furthermore, the rotation would begin with Yamina party chair Naftali Bennett as prime minister, despite Bennett's Yamina being among the smallest parties in Knesset. Still, the government manages to pass a budget and ostensibly functions for a time. But less than a year in, the coalition's majority is lost due to defectors and resignations, and after Bennett decides to push for government dissolution, Lapid takes over as interim prime minister until fifth serial elections tomorrow, November 1st, 2022.
Joining us now with more on tomorrow's elections, political analyst Mitchell Barak from Kievan Research Strategy and Communications. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Close to 40% of the population doesn't believe in the accuracy of this coming election, let alone those who aren't planning to go voting. This is pretty concerning, isn't it?
It is, but, this is, they don't believe in the accuracy of the election. What does that mean exactly?
You mean they don't believe that it will be actually possible to form a government finally and the accuracy of it?
Yeah, well, I think Israelis are a little bit disillusioned already at this point. I mean, this is the fifth election. There doesn't seem to be leadership in this country. Nobody really seems to be able to form a government, but we'll just give it a try. Israelis will give it a try, vote again. I think there will be increased pressure on the politicians to form a government, to make compromises, and we may be looking at Netanyahu. If he doesn't hit this fifth election and become prime minister, he may be looking at an early retirement, earlier than expected, because he's got to produce something. After 5 elections, if you can't win, I think even the Likud is going to replace you.
Do you really see him retiring this time if he doesn't succeed?
Oh, he'll never retire. He will never give up. But I think if he doesn't come away right away with a clear 61, or if he doesn't hit that 30 threshold and Likud gets less than 30, like 29, he's going to have a problem keeping on to the Likud. Because the fact is, the majority of members of Knesset in the Likud would want to form a government, could form a government, either with another Likud candidate for prime minister or someone else. It could be a unifying person, could be Benny Gantz, could be someone else that could come forward and unify them. And we may see breakaways and splits, both from the Likud and from the other parties. So I think we will know, obviously, more tomorrow night when the polls close. But then the fun just begins, because we just don't know what numbers the parties are, which party is going to cross the threshold, because that will affect things too within the blocks, and then who is most likely to be able to form a government. One thing is clear: as long as there's uncertainty, as long as there's no government, as long as we might even be going to a 6th election, Yair Lapid stays in that position as interim prime minister, and that's exactly where Netanyahu wanted to be and was for the past few years.
It's totally true, but Mitchell, no polls are published in the last 4 days leading to the election day, and we all remember the swings from previous years. What potential surprises do you see in store this time?
Well, it's a good thing the polls aren't published in the last 4 days, because I think many of them are just irresponsible. All of the newspapers and media organizations want to be part of this process and not just report on it. They all have polls. Some of them are similar. And all of the news agencies agree that the election will be won or lost both on turnout, which is always the case, but on which parties get over the threshold or not. And, there's a lot of scaring tactics, and people have tried to get Ayelet Shaked to drop out. And is Meretz going to get over? Is the Labor Party going to get over? All of these things. And it's just a stupid conversation, because the threshold to get into the Knesset is 3.5%. And the margin of error on all of these polls of 600 people, which are internet panels anyway, and not accurate, is 4.5%. So who would even talk about the results of getting over the threshold or not? It's not even relevant that they talk about it. And we'll have to wait and see. It could be a few thousand votes either way that decide the election based on the blocks and which parties get in and which parties get out. That also includes the Arab sector. So we don't really know anything. The polls are just a way to keep the conversation going. but really irrelevant up until this point and still irrelevant.
To watch full episodes of ILTV's Israel Daily and tons of other content from Israel, visit our website at iltv.tv or download the ILTV Plus app.